everyone. I am so sorry about that little intro there. We were just joking, just teasing to see if you were all really ready to be here with us tonight. But thank you for joining us here, Truth Brigade, on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. It's, one of those days. Time to wind down now. And I know you thought, because of the intro, Tobias was going to be here, but that was a replay. But we are live for reals, April 12th, 2011, right now. So if you'd like to join us on the text chat tonight, that's over at TruthBrigade.com. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to give us a call at 402-237-2525. That's 402-AFR-2525. Our special guest tonight is Mary Callahan. She's an emergency room nurse, a cardiopulmonary nurse educator, and an ex-foster parent. She's the author of 2 books, her first of which is Fighting for Tony, which is an account of her own research that led to a cure of her son's autism, and as well as numerous articles on parenting, nursing, foster care. And her second book is called Memoirs of a Baby Stealer, Lessons I've Learned as a Foster Mother. And, wow, Mary, it is so good to have you here tonight.
Well, it's
sorry
good to be
about
here.
that little delay going on, but, how you doing?
Good. It was good to talk to you this afternoon, too.
Yes, I read your book a couple months ago. And many of you know, I'm sure, my children, were kidnapped a year ago, actually, to the day, April 12th, 2010. And, I just have to say, I think obviously that's kind of a tumultuous event, and you really don't know how to deal with it. You have all these emotions going around. And, I was kind of thinking of me. All of this pain that I was going through. And, of course I thought about the children a little bit that I knew, but reading your book, Mary, really opened my eyes to the pain and turmoil that the children are suffering. And, not just mine, millions of children a year suffering, because you just did such a good job putting this together and letting us all see things from a new perspective. And, just reading about your struggles and your trials, trying to be a foster mom because you wanted to take care of children, and, noble intentions, and how even these noble intentions can sometimes go wrong. I want to thank you, Mary, so much for putting this book out there for people to see, because it's just really, really eye-opening. And I don't know if there's many foster moms or ex-foster moms standing up and talking about this issue, so I really appreciate it.
Well, there are a few, but I met others who secretly had relationships with birth family and took kids to see birth family because they didn't think they should have been removed and that sort of thing. But most are either, still naively thinking that they're rescuing these kids, because that is what you think at the beginning, or, there's a lot of reasons to go into it that are not high-minded. There's actually some pretty good money in it in some states.
I was blown away to find that. I know we hear about, the bonuses, and, of course, all the social workers and everyone else involved gets paid, but...
Well, it's kind of the myth of the myth of the underpaid foster parent. There's a lot of range of what a foster parent can get paid. And just as an example, in this state, when I was doing it, the lowest level would be about $500 a month, but the highest level was over $2,500 a month. And many of the kids, if they, exhibited any behavior problems, and Lord knows they're going to when they've been taken away from their family and they've been moved from home to home, they get labeled as having mental health issues, and then the pay is much higher. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So they cause trauma, then take them to a psychologist, have somebody diagnose them with something, and then you get what, an extra $2,000 or $3,000 a month because they're taking a pill?
Well, it's funny because the first time one of my kids got labeled because of a behavior, I told you those dogs were going to do this to me. But anyway,
baby?
He was 9 years old, and the head of the private foster care agency said to me, well, the good news is you'll be on the highest rate of pay until he's 18. Because at that point, they never backed it back down again after they exhibited this kind of behavior, which some of this stuff is starting to be fixed. I mean, people are starting to see that that's crazy. He was 9. So for 9 years, we're going to call him mentally ill? I mean, he was just angry over what was going on.
And rightfully so.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of things in this state that are improved, and there's a lot of states that are trying to improve. And part of, I think, what you have to do is get the public to see, as I did, that these are not kids from brutally abusive homes that are going to run into your arms and say, thank you so much. These are kids from poverty, from, you know, maybe a chaotic spell in the family, going through divorce or something. You know, more than half of them were never abused in their family. And they don't feel like they needed rescuing, and they feel more kidnapped than rescued. And it takes a while as a foster parent when you realize there's a reason these kids are never accepting you. They have parents, and that's where they want to be.
Absolutely. Very good point. And, I mean, through your experiences, I think you had about 10 children that you had mentioned in this book. And was there, maybe one that might have been abused?
There was one. You know, and it's funny because some of them... Excuse me?
1 out of 10.
Yeah, and he actually is the only one who went home. And he was from a middle-income family, and all the other kids were from low-income families. And their lawyer really called the shots and got him removed from the system and placed with family very quickly. While these other kids, they were, you know, my first kid was removed over a spanking. Now, when I was first told about it, I was given all kinds of other information, like mom's a hooker with AIDS and dad broke both mom's arms and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, eventually when I'd had her long enough, it's like, oh, that was an anonymous phone call. We don't actually know if that's true. Oh, the broken arms? Well, no, I think he threatened that. And so all the horror stories start dropping away until you're down to a spanking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the kid has been in a brutally abusive foster home for 6 years because her dad spanked her.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
amazing.
Yeah.
And so of all the children you had, only one was abused, but they happened to have money and lawyers, so that was the only child that went back to their parents?
Absolutely. And, you know, it is a war on the poor to a great extent. I was at a big workshop where the head of the child protective system here in this state, because they've got issues, but they're loved there, and that's what matters. But then they're put with strangers. And then they're put with another set of strangers and another set of strangers because nobody stays in the same foster home. So that in the end...
You know what really tore me up, Mary? I mean, okay, everybody who listens to the show knows that I had a little back injury, I guess about a month ago, and that was when we initially had scheduled this show. And as I told everyone, it wasn't physical. I didn't, you know, fall out of a tree or off a roof or anything like that. I found out after reading Dr. John Sarno that it was, in fact, emotional and emotions that I was suppressing. And I'm not blaming you, Mary.
Oh, no.
It was my book. It was your book that just opened up that flood of emotion and just imagining not just my children, all the children being tossed around like a hot potato. You know, or like you're playing football and, you know, one family to the next family to the next family and without anybody, hardly anybody, you know, really even caring. And I'm thankful that, you know, there are or were people like you within the system with good intentions who truly loved the kids and, you know, you still have relationships with them and everything, but that's not typical. It just really killed me to imagine, you know,
all varieties of people that go into foster care, and, you know, sometimes the kids are lucky for a while, but then they'll be removed from the place where they're doing well for no good reason. But, you know, I always say to people, but you don't have to imagine it. Imagine what it would be like for your own kids if suddenly somebody walked in the door and said, you're out of here, you know. You're going to this place for a while, and then the next thing you know, months go by and somebody walks in the door and says, this one's over, we're going to some other place, you know. And if there was siblings, they may be together, they may not be together. And one couple of kids that I had, they were in separate group homes, and they were allowed to see each other every 2 months for an hour-long supervised visit. They were still only allowed to say what they were told to say on visits with their own siblings that they'd been through so much with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, who can survive sane with what we're putting these kids through when it would be so much easier to help their families get through rough times?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there are ways of doing that. And, you know, some states are doing more of that. It's not only better for the kids, but it's cheaper. Why not do that? I mean, there's just no downside.
Definitely. I mean, it really blows my mind when you really look at the money involved and hearing that people are getting bonuses. I mean, I guess I used to always wonder why CPS workers are always driving like Escalades and stuff, especially out in California. But I just figured, okay, well, they have a rich husband or, you know, trust fund baby or something. I had no idea that the bonuses were, you know, as such. And, you know, you do a little looking into it, and it's like, this can't be. Come on. We're in this, you know, so-called free country. They care about the children, and now they're getting paid. They have, like, quotas or something.
Well,
I mean, maybe it's not a quota, but if you're getting, you know, several $1,000 bonuses each time you take one in and get rid of one, you know, or turn them over, that's probably a lot of incentive to keep the ball rolling.
Well, incentive is a big part of the problem because every single person involved is getting paid by the child by the day that they're in the system. Foster parents, social workers, private social care agencies, the guardian ad litem who, you know, some of them get paid, some don't, but they're not paid if the kid leaves the system. And when you really add up, each one of those people has a supervisor and a janitor that cleans the place and a secretary up front. So you've got dozens of people that depend on a good chunk of kids in the foster care system. And these are the same people, for the most part, who are going to go tell the judge, we think this kid should go home or stay with the foster parents or whatever we think should happen. Well, nobody argues for their own, you know, the opposite of their own self-interest. You know, and sometimes you're not even
okay, well, they're doing great in their placement, so just move on.
Yeah, let's not rock the boat here.
Funny.
You know?
In my situation, the worker and everyone will say, oh, they're doing great in their placement. Everything's wonderful. They passed all these, I don't know, little acronym, weird little things that I don't even really know about because they won't talk to me about it.
Yeah.
But, you know, they keep telling me how happy, they're great, but we still think they should remain in state's care. So the state, I guess, meanwhile, is getting paid, even though my children are out of state, while other people are paying to raise them, and we're not allowed any contact for their own good.
Well, you know, sadly, lying is standard operating procedure. And I actually read a book written by a social worker where he said that they're instructed not to call it lying, but to call it interpreting. Because, you know, they're not going to come to you and say, your kids are doing horribly. You know, they want you to finally give in and agree that they're doing the right thing. But April, my first little girl that had come from 6 years in this brutal foster home over a spanking, her dad had been told for 6 years that she's doing fine there, she's happy, she doesn't want to go home. Well, you know, she was told that her parents hadn't done the things they were supposed to do to get her back. So everybody's getting misinformation, including the misinformation I got, you know, all these horrible things, you know, mom's a hooker with AIDS. Neither is true, you know, that sort of thing. So they really
say
depend.
That? Mom's a hooker with AIDS?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was told. Then one family I was told, let's see, they're the scum of the earth because they had said to me that mom's done everything she's supposed to do to get the kid back, so we have to come up with something else, because we're not ready to give the kid back. And I said, well, why would you do that? She's gone to all the classes and, you know, counseling and everything she's supposed to do. And they said, oh, don't worry about it. These people are the scum of the earth. So you've got this whole us against them mentality. And, again, I met Mom, and I liked her. But, you know, they sort of build this us against them mentality, and they tell themselves behind the scenes that the kids may hate you for it now, but they'll thank you for it later. And one worker told me she'd been waiting 20 years for somebody to thank her for it later.
Wow.
But in the end, the system depends on keeping people from telling each other the truth. that, they just keep the misinformation going, the kids in the system, the money flowing. And the first time anybody told me it was about money, I thought that was crazy paranoid, too. And then I was told the reason I couldn't adopt one of the kids is because the private foster care agency needed the income. So,
wow.
Right there it was just like, oh, so we can come right out and say that.
Mm-hmm. So you had no idea that this was basically, I mean, how is it any different than human trafficking, what's going on?
Well, it's a slow, evolution of accepting how it is. You kind of one step at a time. I thought the one child had been just sort of fallen through the cracks and somebody missed this whole thing. And, then the next child comes and it's like, wait a minute, this one was removed over what? And
you mistakes in a row?
so it's one after the other. And the last couple of kids, they already knew about me because the book was out and everything. They're like, oh, this is the most straightforward case. Don't worry about a thing. And it doesn't take you long at all to find out that all three of these kids have been told that Dad molested the other kid in the family, but not them. And then when they're finally allowed to talk to each other, they're all like, no, not me. I thought it was you. So, again, they're dependent on misinformation to keep everybody in their place.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is.
So everyone's being lied to, and you're all kind of like at odds with each other, thinking, they're out to get you, or you're mad at somebody else over things they didn't do because of what these workers who are supposed to be caring for our children, the disinformation. Oh my gosh, Mary, my goodness. It is that time. So hold that right there. So much more to talk about tonight. Stay tuned, everyone. We will be right back with Mary Callahan here on Truth Brigade Radio. For joining us here tonight, Truth Brigade on AmericanFreedomRadio.com with Mary Callahan tonight, who is a nurse and author and ex-foster care worker. Her book, Memoirs of a Baby Stealer, which we're talking about tonight, lessons that she learned as a foster mother, you can find at Amazon. I'll post the link in the text chat over at TruthBrigade.com. Is there any other way to get your book besides Amazon, Mary?
Well, Amazon has a lot of used copies because it's kind of out of print, but it's self-published. My garage is full of them, and I'd be happy to mail them off to people if they can email me an address.
Just like that?
Well, I wouldn't mind getting paid for the postage, but it might be $1.50 or something because if there's enough of them, it might add up. But I don't mind doing that because it was meant to be read and it was meant to, well, it kind of did help in this state, in Maine, because the governor made the Health and Human Services Committee read it, and then he started the reform process. So
it kind of here on Amazon. Do you know how much they're selling your books for?
No.
$64.98. Oh my gosh!
Oh, it's much cheaper from my garage.
That's the cheapest one. Here's another one, $150.82.
That's
for
bizarre.
One of you. Yeah. Okay.
I should have thought of that.
I didn't see those prices. Okay, so the best way to get your book is to email you and then send $5 or whatever other you feel you want to donate for the cause, and she will send you a book out. Does that sound fair?
Yep. And you can give out my email address? Or I should?
Mm-hmm.
Should I give out my email address, or should people go to you for it?
Yeah, no, whichever you prefer. I can handle that, or whatever you prefer.
Okay, well, I'll let you handle it because you have my email address. But I could send you a box of them, too, if you wanted me to.
All right, I'll give them away. Absolutely. My gosh, I'll give them to the social work. In fact, next time I go to court, I'll give one to every single person in there.
Okay. But, I have something to tell you.
Uh-huh.
I've been waiting to tell you about because it's something, this all happened in Maine 10 years ago, and there was 5 years' worth of a lot of work involved with picketing, everything from picketing to being on committees and things like that. But then they got the right people in here, and things have changed a lot, and there are half the number of kids in care, and they do much, much more to keep kids with family. And one of the things they do, which I think is great, is that kids that are going to go with grandma and grandpa or aunt and uncle or something like that, they go directly there. They don't have to go languish with strangers while they wait. So, a lot of good things are happening here, which kind of made me obsolete. There really wasn't much for me to do here. But I kind of knew it was going on all over the country, and plus so many people have been caught up in it over the years, and their kids are gone, lost to them at this point. So I had this moment where it just dawned on me that the Internet can break down the barriers to communication. And, I saw a headline on Newsweek that said something, I think it was Newsweek, something about social media topples dictators. And so I got this idea for a website where parents can write letters to the kids that they've lost to the foster care system, telling them the truth behind the story so that they're not living with the lies, like mom chose boyfriend over you or dad molested your sister and stuff like that, so that they can write letters to tell them the truth. And the kids can go on.
How do we do that? What's the website for that?
Well, right now it's got a countdown page, and May 1st it should be up and running. And I'm working with some people that are the reformers in Nebraska, the child protection reformers. They are sort of like your counterpart and mine. And the husband turns out to be somebody who designs websites. So, he's helping me put this up. But the name of the website is www.ilovedyouFirst.org.
I loved you first.org.
ilovedyouFirst.org. It's one word, of course. ilovedyouFirst.org.
Okay.
And it'll be,
ilovedyouFirst.org. That's a wonderful idea.
Well, it's because, like I've been telling you how much it bothers me that the whole system depends on lies to stay afloat, that to get behind the workers where they can't interfere and tell the truth. And then see what happens. Kids should know before they're 18.
How are they like advocates? How would they get the letters to the children?
Well, the letters will go on the website, and at this point I'm looking for people for that angle, because I don't want to sort of publicize it to kids until there's letters for them to look for their own, that sort of thing. But there are ways of, even with my former foster kids, they've got support groups online and things like that to find the kids in the system who have been in the system. And, there are just ways of, I've got some ideas getting to the kids. It's easier to get to the parents because I've got connections with so many people that have been involved and have lost everything to the foster care system. So, I'm kind of starting at that point, but I know what I'm going to do once I've got enough letters in terms of trying to get it out to the kids, that they should look for letters from their parents. And then they're going to have to search for the letters that might be for them. The first thing to look for is the state that you were involved in, and then your birth date is actually even more important than your name, because a lot of people change the kids' names once they get into the system, especially if they're young enough, they might not remember. But birth dates usually don't get changed.
Okay, let me ask you this. In your experience, is it true that the children in foster care are not allowed to use the Internet?
Not anywhere I know of. My kids used it all the time. But that's funny because
it was off limits. I don't know if it's a statewide thing here, because I've heard that before. But yeah, that was something they were not allowed to do. My children,
kids use the Internet in school though all the time. It's almost impossible to keep kids away from the Internet. Their friends will be sitting there with if they go to a friend's house in front of a computer. Yeah. I think that's not going to work to try to keep kids away from the Internet. Although there's a flyer that's meant for foster parents, they still haven't taken me off the list, about a workshop coming up on what to do when your kids find their parents on Facebook. So, the social media is getting the truth across to the kids. And that's what I'm trying to encourage.
Yeah, what I decided to do, and I don't know, they'll probably come up with something to charge me with or accuse me of, but I got tired of all of the, it's been a year now, and it was several months, I guess about 8 months now of zero contact, and I'm not allowed to contact them or who they're with, and they're not allowed to contact me, etc. So I just decided I've had enough. I mean, we have a blog up there that has kept track of everything, but I thought I could do something more personal and put up a YouTube page where I could just talk to them on a webcam and say whatever I wanted to say and not be censored anymore and just know that they'll find it eventually.
Right. Well, that's another example of how the lies that are being told are going to be corrected by the people who actually know the truth. And it's, it's social media and the Internet that's doing that. You just wonder if it's toppling entire countries in the Middle East because people can finally communicate with each other, if it can't eventually topple this dictatorship. Because, people say, well, gee, aren't an awful lot of kids don't they really need protecting? My experience is that it's a small number of kids that really need protecting. They're out there. Yes, there are terrible things that happen to kids sometimes. And one time I had somebody say to me, well, if one child is saved, isn't it worth the other 100 kids that may not have needed to be in the system? Not if it's your kids, it isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy notion that we can't, be a little more discriminating and take kids that are really in danger and then give them the really good foster parents and help the foster parents deal with the issues so they can stay in one home, and then you're actually rescuing kids instead of just taking them from one situation that might not be perfect and putting them in another one that's definitely not perfect.
Yeah. Well, from what we're seeing everywhere is that there's much higher incidence of abuse, death, of course, rape, etc., when children are in foster care than in their natural homes.
There are studies in different states, and of course they try to keep this sort of thing quiet. And when a death does happen in foster care, it often is just really swept under the rug in terms of the newspapers. But you're as much as 10 times more likely to have a child abuse death in a foster home than with birth family.
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, we had the thing that triggered all the change in the state of Maine was a 5-year-old girl whose foster mother was a former child protective worker who duct taped her to a high chair in the basement to deal with her tantrums, and she suffocated.
Gosh.
She suffocated.
She what?
The girl suffocated. She died.
Oh my gosh.
And this foster mother was a former child protective worker.
Wow.
And she was removed from her mother over moving too much, maybe a questionable boyfriend in the deal, no abuse. And this birth mother was one of those people that did a lot of videotaping, so there was a documentary that was on PBS where her mother showed all these videotapes. This girl was the happiest, healthiest, sweetest little girl, and then she gets into foster care, and she's like crazy looking and, skinny and tantruming, and I mean, they were destroying this child, and then they killed her.
Oh my gosh.
Really, the system is taking kids from chaos and putting them in hell.
You got to experience a little of that though too with other foster parents and such that were in the system and abusing the children, but they had told so many lies that anytime the children spoke up, it was just, oh, she's a troublemaker.
Oh yeah. Well, April, my first kid, the first time I went to pick her up, I was doing respite with her on weekends because supposedly she was so hard for these foster parents who'd had her for 6 years to deal with. Well, the first time I go to pick her up, deep in the woods in Maine, where nobody can see what goes on, and this foster mother says to me right in front of her, she's a whore just like her mother.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh, my God, this is a foster parent? Well, the more I got to know.
A little girl.
Yeah, and she lived with me. Finally, she ended up with me for 4 years, and I'd get story after story of the things that happened with her. I mean, the girl was malnourished when she moved in with me and reading 4 years below grade level. And I'd call the worker and say, were you aware that they were withholding food? And she'd say, well, she was pretty hard to deal with. They were pretty much out of ideas. And I said, well, what was so horrible? And they said, well, she was very mouthy. I said, so you're telling me if she mouths off, I can starve her? That's part of being a foster parent? She said, of course not. And I said, then why did she stay there for 6 years?
Yeah, I mean, what do you expect? I would expect the child to be a little bit mouthy after they're completely uprooted, ripped away from people they love and who love them, and, have a whole bunch of strangers now infiltrating and trying to control their life. I mean, amen for the kids that speak up.
That could still speak up, yeah. And she was a great kid and a really tough cookie, but, I mean, what she went through was completely... there was no need of it. She had perfectly good parents, and this banking that led to her being in foster care her parents were newly divorced, and she and her 3 siblings were spending the weekend with their dad for the first time, and Dad really didn't know how to handle 3 wild kids in his apartment for the weekend, and things did get out of control. So get somebody in there and help.
Yeah,
get them past the rough. And Mom wasn't even there. And then when I said to them, well, why didn't they go back with their mother? They said to me, well, Mom's a flake. She's been married 3 times. I've been married 3 times.
Brother.
It didn't keep me from...
I mean, come on.
I know Mom's a flake.
What an abuser. I mean, you should definitely take her kids away.
Yeah. But, you know,
it blows my mind how these people think.
You know, and I went to so many people about April. I went to, you know, this is before I realized that this is just par for the course. But when I went up to the state legislature and the Health and Human Services Committee thinking that they should be appalled by her situation and do something about it, and they said to me, we've got 100 stories just like it. There's nothing new here. So everybody on the inside was bored by her story. And my friends at work, who were not foster parents and didn't know anything about, I'd tell their story and they'd start to cry. They were so upset by what had happened to her. So it was just this huge disconnect with the fact that you're not actually protecting kids in the child protective system. You're making their lives worse.
And even with the one that was being abused in the other home, it never actually came out that she was being abused by the foster mother. They just transferred her.
Right. And we actually filed an
Mary,
abuse complaint.
Hold that right there. I'm going to have you continue when we come back from this short break. Stay tuned. Mary Callahan here on Truth Brigade Radio. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Truth Brigade on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Mary, we kind of got cut off there before that last break, so if you would, please continue.
Uh-oh. What was I talking about? Yeah, just as far we filed an abuse complaint against that family.
People who, you know, children speaking up, the ones that are in there, you know, being abused, it's always covered up. That the family who, you know, in your book, or the foster family, excuse me, there was never any retribution or reprimand, or punishment for them actually abusing her all that time. They just kind of moved her.
Right, we filed an abuse complaint against them eventually. It took me a while before, and it was funny because I kept going to the people saying, you realize this was happening, you realize this was happening, and they would make excuses, and they would say things like, well, that's why we got her out of there. But finally, when she was, you know, I gathered enough, and she got older and more mature, and we said, we need to sit down with these people and talk about what they've done to you. And their response was, why haven't you filed an abuse complaint to me? They said, you're a mandated reporter. You should have called this in. I said, called it in. I've been talking to you guys directly. So they have a way of turning everything against you.
So then it became your fault if they were about to acknowledge any abuse. Amazing.
Right. But Mary, then we did file a complaint, and it was investigated and called unsubstantiated, even though the other foster kids in the home told us that they told the same story.
So the foster kids, of course, the one that's being abused, you and other people who saw it, but it was completely unsubstantiated.
Right.
Well, then why did they move her?
Officially they moved her because the family wanted her out of there because she was so much trouble.
Oh, wow.
So, you know,
so they abuse the children and then blame it on the children being just incorrigible.
You know, and they kept saying to me how difficult she had been, and that's why these things happen. And then you've got to ask yourself, if the birth family had been starving her and doing all this stuff to her and then said, oh, it's because she's difficult, you think that would have kept her at home? Of course not. They'd have snatched her out of the birth family so fast. So a foster family can make excuses. And even, you know, I mean, when we were in the middle of our big protests and stuff like that, we had this event we called the Unfair Fair in downtown Portland, where we had all these exhibits. And one of them that I put up, which I thought was interesting, is I knew a grandmother who was trying to get custody of her grandkids who were in the foster care system, and they came out to look at her home, and they ended up writing her a letter saying that her home was a nightmare and a health hazard, with dogs that tracked dirt into the house and cats that walked across kitchen counters, and they didn't think it was healthy for the kids. Well, that describes my house perfectly, with the dogs coming in and the cats on the kitchen counter, and I'm a terrible housekeeper, And the social workers would come out to my house and they'd say, I'm so glad you're so relaxed with the kids. You know, some foster parents are such control freaks. So what looks good as a foster family, when birth family's trying to get the kids back, it's a bad thing. It's all so subjective. You can, you can paint something one way or you can paint it the other way, and they paint it whatever way works for them.
Yeah, you're so right. So, okay, in the foster home, it's okay. We're just going to brush that over. But any natural parents decide to have kitties and doggies or raccoons or whatever else.
And I read a report of why her grandkids were removed in the first place. And there were things in there like there was ketchup on the kitchen table that looked like it had been there for days. Well, I want to know, how does that look different than ketchup that just came out? How about restaurants where ketchup sits on the table for days? And really, why does this even belong in a report about why you're removing children? You know, a high chair with dried food all over it. Isn't that what high chairs look like?
Oh, my God.
You know, how is that a reason to remove children? All of this stuff, it's like none of your business. Let's talk about abuse, not dried food on a high chair. But there was no abuse.
Well, the guidelines for abuse are just so flexible, I guess. It's just up to one person's opinion.
Well, in Maine, as I told you, as a foster parent, it was kind of a gradual opening my eyes to the system. But one of the things that really did it for me was going to a workshop for foster parents on reporting abuse. And they talked about things like, the kid that knocks over things in the grocery store and mom grabs him by the arm and says, how many times have I told you? Or gives him a swat on the bottom. What did I tell you? That's abuse. We were supposed to call 911 if a mother swats a kid on the bottom in the Rite Aid. A timeout over 10 minutes, they said, was child abuse. And I sat there thinking, good Lord, I'm glad they weren't watching me raise my kids. Mine got swatted on the bottom. They got timeouts, and I didn't, it just was nonsense. Well, then they had this big child abuse workshop. And the guy that was putting it on was on the news that night saying, now we're starting to look at something else as child abuse, and that's kids who don't get enough attention. And they said, sometimes I think that's the worst kind of child abuse. And I'm thinking, I think Logan getting duct taped to a chair until she's suffocated might have been a little worse.
Yeah.
But, they're saying that this is the worst kind of, and you should contact the state and call 911 if you know a child that doesn't get enough attention. I ended up writing a letter to the editor of the paper, and I just said, this is nonsense. Are we going to be reporting the cardiac surgeon because he doesn't give enough attention to his kids because he's in the OR all day? Or are we just talking about people that work at the convenience store?
No, just single parents who waitress or have to work 3 minimum wage jobs.
Yeah, and I said, if you know a child who doesn't get enough attention, I suggest you pay attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
Calling the state is just going to ruin their lives. But the people who want to call that child abuse are the people who are making money on the number of kids in the system. And I know it sounds crazy.
No, we know it's true. And I mean, not only that, those are the exact same people that are 10 times more likely to abuse your children after they kidnap them for profit. But it is that time again. We are going to be back at the top of the hour. Mary Callahan, author of Memoirs of a Baby Stealer, Lessons I've Learned as a Foster Mother. And you can just email me or Mary to read one of her books. But we're going to be right back, top of the second hour, with Mary Callahan here on Truth Brigade Radio. All right, welcome back. Top of the second hour here tonight with Mary Callahan, talking about her experiences as a foster mom. And Mary, we just have a few short minutes this segment, but okay, I'm getting back to you finding out about this. How long were you in foster care before you first saw signs that things might not be the way you thought they were when you signed up?
Well, I was into it to do long-term care, so I expected to get one child, have her for a long time, and maybe even finish raising her. So April, the first child, I thought her situation was a fluke. And like I said, each one that came in, I'd get more information. Well, I was getting more and more frustrated. I've been doing it for probably 5 years, and every time I got another kid and dealing with another worker, the set of rules would be completely different, and the expectations were different, and the relationship was different, and it was just like crazy making for the foster parent. But at the same time, the kids, all they want to do is sneak calls to their parents. But anyway, at a certain point, I went to the state legislature about her, and I was told, I ran into another foster parent who said, you better get out of here before the state sees you, because they'll file an abuse complaint against you by the time you get home if they think that you're talking about them. And I, at first, got kind of scared out of doing anything. And so I started kind of writing on my computer, because I felt like each one of these kids' stories needed to be somewhere, just written for, so that time doesn't pass to forget the details and stuff like that. But I didn't think of publishing it. And then Logan Marr was killed by her foster mother. And that 5-year-old girl, when that made the news, and there were people who'd been fighting the system for years, long before I came along, who they made sure the papers were not allowed to sweep it under the rug, and details would come out, and the details were so similar to April's story that I started thinking, my gosh, this is it. This is the system. This is how the system works. And there was such an uproar.
You started to see that from your first child.
I did, except I thought it was a fluke. I thought she was rare. And then, in foster parent support groups, you'd meet other parents, and they'd be like, well, I take my kid to see his mother all the time because, what they did to her should never have happened. So there were foster parents behind the scenes seeing that this is kind of silly. I mean, even the fact that we get paid when often these kids are removed over poverty helps them.
That doesn't make much sense. You don't have enough money according to what we think, so we're just going to pay someone else 10 times more than you'll ever make.
Right.
Wow.
Well, and even, the amount that I was eventually getting paid was ridiculous. But then when they started talking about reforming the system, one of the things they wanted to do is cut foster parent pay and cut it back when the kid settles in and is no longer, upset and all this kind of stuff. So foster parents went crazy, and they were, calling the newspapers and going to the governor and all this and painting themselves as such martyrs and how awful it was going to be if they didn't make this money anymore. So I did what I always do, and I wrote op-ed for the paper, and I said, let me just tell you how much I get paid, and at that point I was getting $2,500 a month tax-free per child.
And that was before they diagnosed him with something, right?
No, that was after, but at that point, the kids I was getting, and more than, like, 3/4 of the kids in the system have a mental health diagnosis.
No taxes, $5,000 a month plus expenses, right?
Oh yeah, you can mail in your bills, your phone bill, your gas bill. The kids get a separate check 3 times a year for clothes.
Oh my gosh! Wow, Mary, hold that right there. I'm sorry it's that time, but we're going to be right back with a much longer segment. Stay tuned. Truth Brigade Radio. Thanks so much for joining us here tonight. Truth Brigade on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. If you would like to join us for the text chat tonight, that's over at TruthBrigade.com. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to give us a call at 402-237-2525. That's 402-AFR-2525. Our special guest tonight is Mary Callahan, and we are talking about her book, Memoirs of a Baby Stealer, Lessons that She Learned as a Foster Mother. And you can either get her book on Amazon and pay up to $150 plus, or...
If I'd only known it was worth that.
Yeah, amazing, huh? Or you could just send us an email and send, $5 or whatever you have for shipping, and either her or I will send one right out to you. But I'm totally blown away, Mary. And the money thing, all right, I grew up with the myth that foster parents don't make anything.
Yeah.
And because there was always a couple foster kids in school, and, they usually hung out with kind of the rougher crowd, and looking back on it, it's like, gosh, I wish I knew what I knew now. But their clothes didn't match, or they always had holes, or their shoes didn't match, or they didn't have any, and they said because their foster parents had no money. Yet the children, their foster sisters or, the natural born children always looked great, looked wonderful. And so, I'm reading that chapter in your book where, I forget which child it was, but in one of the foster parent homes where they had to eat, they had separate food and the natural born children had the special food, etc. But to find out that, not only all of that money you get paid tax-free, all of the bills even, telephone, gas bills, they pay for clothes on top of it 3 times a year. One of the... when my children were here and I was visiting with them, I would make them food because, we make everything from scratch here and grow our own food. And I was just terrified of them having fluoride and, they got sick immediately eating cafeteria or, junk food. They were in boys and girls towns, so I can just imagine it's institution food. So I'd stay up for 3 days and make them like 10 meals and desserts and bread and stuff to just stock them up and bring them all these boxes. And then they moved to another location, and I asked if they were eating lots of fruits and vegetables, and they said, well, no, she can't afford any. There was like one rotten apple. I said, well, what are you eating? Well, like Hamburger Helper, or they named some other things that come in cans and boxes, stuff that we would never eat at our house. Anyway, so that kind of blew my mind.
Foster parent pay isn't like universal.
Well, I asked her. She doesn't have enough money for fruits and vegetables. Can I bring a bunch? In addition to all the other food. And, wow.
When I first started, I was on the lowest level of pay, which was $500 a month without all the extras. But then, like I said, as the kids got ornerier, then they start upping your pay dramatically. But every state does things differently. And I think in the past, like when you and I were in school, my parents did foster care, and they just got enough to sort of help with some of the extra bills. It wasn't like it had become in this state where it was lucrative. People were putting their kids through college on foster kids, And it was funny because when my kids would be particularly difficult, coworkers of mine would say, you couldn't pay me enough to do what you're doing. And I'd tell them I get paid, and they wanted the phone number to sign up. Mm-hmm. So it has gone from one extreme to the other. But in the end, I think if you're not doing it at least in part out of the kindness of your heart, then you do the kids a disservice because they're eventually going to figure out that maybe you were good to them, but you weren't paid to be good to them. So does it even count? Mm-hmm. And for myself, I was already speaking out against the system after that 5-year-old child died. But every time I did, I would, avoid the money subject because, and I wasn't, saying this to myself consciously, but subconsciously, I didn't want it to stop. But then I realized one day, the money's the heart of the problem. You have to talk about it, even if it does mean that my own goes away, which it did.
Yeah, but, what a position you were in, though.
And every foster parent that's making that kind of money, when they're asked how to, do you think the kids should be reunited, how are they doing with their parents, you're asking them to voluntarily give away $2,500 a month. Mm-hmm. Most people
minimum
act on their own
plus
self-interest.
All bills, all expenses paid, etc.
Yeah, wow. So, it's too much. It's way too much when...
Babysitters, activities, dance lessons, sport, everything.
But even then, I was trying to adopt one of the kids who'd been with me for a long time, and the private foster care agency we were with said to me, they said, we need 60 kids to make payroll, and we only have 61. We're not talking adoption or reunification with any of these kids until we get our numbers up. Mm. So, after a while... If you're not talking about money, you're not talking about the real problem, because that really, I think, is the heart. And, everybody who gets paid to, say, do parent evaluations and or do counseling with the kids and things like that, every one of them is dependent upon these kids staying in the system. So they're not going to go to the judge unless, except in rare occasions, and say this kid ought to go home. Mm-hmm. And that's why once they're in the system,
Imagine if they spent just a tenth of the money they spend in foster care. Or even just, even less than that. How about, you mean your children want dance lessons or, softball or whatever, and you can't afford the uniforms? Here, we'll do that because we're here to help the families, right?
Yeah, and I got to be friends with some people when their kids did get returned. And this one young woman, she gets a 4-year-old and 6-year-old boy back that had been in the system for 2 years. And, of course, they're pretty difficult after everything they've been through. And I called up the workers and said, a swing set in the yard, it wouldn't even be that expensive compared. If I called you and said, as a foster parent, I need a swing set in the yard, you'd just say, buy one and send us the bill.
Yeah.
So can you not do that for her? We don't have the funds for that.
Yeah, of course not.
And part of it is that that's the way it's set up. They really don't have the funds for that. It comes down from the feds what you can spend money on and what you can't. And that's, it's got to change from the very, like I said once in front of a group of people, it's got to change from the vision on up. Everything about it has got to change for it to
Look
actually...
Look at the imbalance, though. I mean, they decide what they do have money for and what they don't, and so far it sounds like they have plenty of money, endless supplies in destroying families and taking children away, but they have no money to help the actual parents?
And, the way the states can change it is something that's actually being argued at the federal level right now, is that instead of giving these monies that go to specific things, you can take A, B, and C out of this stream of money and D, E, and F out of this stream, but you can't take helping the families out of any of the streams of money. It's just not there. Give block grants of money to the state to use as they see fit. And when they start looking at how to spend the least amount of money, it's cheapest to help families stay together. They have things called family wraparound programs where when a family does get brought to the attention, and it's not, imminent danger type stuff, you let the family create a team and work on what the issues are, and people start saying, well, if the problem is the after-school hours, I'll take the kids after school, or if this is the problem, if you need a swing set, we've got some money for a swing set if that helps the kids stay in the yard like they're supposed to. And, so they spend far less money doing what's really needed instead of, like you probably learned, too, that once your kids are in the system, you get this cookbook thing that everybody gets. Everybody does anger management, even if anger doesn't have anything to do with the issue.
Everybody didn't order me anything, Mary.
Really?
They never said, take anger management classes or take, anything and you can have your children back. Never. And
you didn't get a case plan?
No, in the case plan, the only thing that was required was that I show up for meetings, I show up for court, and I get a psychological evaluation, which I did before our court hearing, but they chose to, the judge didn't get it, mysteriously, because of course I had no diagnoses or anything wrong, and the psychologist said, send your children home. So they never got that. But no, there was nothing on the case plans. I wasn't ordered to any type of classes. The only orders I've been given are to shut up, remove my blogs, don't talk about it on the show, don't post photos of your children, and don't talk to them. That's it.
Well, in this state, too, if a family went to the papers, they were told, we will automatically terminate your rights if you go to reporters and things. I mean, that's got to be like, it's unconstitutional that you can't talk about your own case.
How typical is it to not have a way or a plan to get your children back in the case plan? Because every other case I've seen or heard of, they're all given, some kind of contingencies. Well, if you complete this or you get a job.
That does sound kind of ominous. I mean, it does sound like the plan from the beginning was that they weren't coming home.
No, that's absolutely right. See, I'm a really bad girl, Mary. I do really stupid things like expose sex trafficking rings that are being run by law enforcement, murdering congressmen. Of course, CPS was on my list. I was highly involved in that, and I don't shut up when I'm told or even offered money to shut up. Or jobs to shut up. Yes, feds. I am telling people. But yeah, no, it was never about that. It was about political retribution, essentially.
Yeah. Well, retribution is like a huge part of what goes on. And like I told you, when I went to Health and Human Services, I was told there's going to be an abuse complaint filed against you by the time you get home if they see you, so you need to get out of here. And then I start hearing about some of the retribution and things that has happened to actually foster parents who speak out. I mean, I knew a woman who had 2 severely handicapped kids, autism and cerebral palsy, and they were foster kids that she'd had for years and was deeply attached and crazy about and all this stuff. But then the state wanted her to testify against a birth family, and she said, I don't know anything. I can't. And they said, you have to because you're under our employ and we're telling you to do it. Oh, and she said, I can't lie in court no matter what. And so they said, then we're taking the kids. And they did. They removed kids she'd had for 10 years. So they do retaliate. So, some of this stuff that sounds kind of far-fetched and, somebody's exaggerating here, once you're around it long enough, there's nothing I don't believe.
I've seen them even go after lawyers that help parents in the same situation as myself and millions of others and take their children. I mean, it's wow.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons that I decided finally to speak out and not to be afraid is because it dawned on me one day, I don't have kids left at home. They're adults. I don't have grandkids. I don't have nieces and nephews. They can't retaliate in the way they can retaliate against somebody else with kids. And if they want to, can they cost me my career?
It's so hard to find lawyers that'll even stand up against CPS. I mean, maybe they'll help you and try to make a deal, but they're not going to go after their crimes against the families. If you mention these things like, silly things, of course, like due process or investigations and stuff.
Well, I got a letter from
a
cop.
Do that.
A policeman contacted me and said that he had gone with a worker to remove kids, and then when he had to go to court to testify against it, the worker sat there and told bold-faced lies about how the parents had acted when they came to get the kids.
Oh,
and he said that he wanted to get up there and say that's not what happened, but then it dawned on him he had kids.
Oh,
so he immediately realized he had to go along with it.
This has to stop. Mary, we have a couple callers on the line.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. It looks like they've been on here for a while.
Oh, dear.
I forgot to check. Our first caller tonight is Mike Hutchinson. How you doing tonight, Mike? Thanks for calling.
Happy Thursday, and Tobias, you sure sound different.
I know. I'm sorry about that little intro. It was just one of those things. I moved to my office today, and clocks were off, and then all of a sudden I heard the music, and anyways. We were just trying to tease you and make sure you were awake.
Well, I paid attention because I got home just in time to hear your show. I'm not kidding. And I hear it, and it was like, Happy Thursday. Oh, my God.
Rushed home for the replay. Okay, well, awesome. I'm glad we are all here. What do you have to share with us tonight, Mike?
I'd like to say that it's my opinion that the system should be done away with completely. I mean, the few kids who are abused, I mean, why can't the police just come over and give them another family member?
Yeah.
So redoing the system, no, just get rid of it, please.
Yeah.
But it does seem like if real abuse is going on, that's a crime. That's for the police. Because we've already got a system.
In the hands of the state.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Yeah. And the kind of power that they have, I thought of it as in terms of if hospitals had that kind of power, where everything that they did, they had complete immunity and complete confidentiality, and the sicker the patients got, the more they got paid, and they could go knock on your door and say, we hear you're sick, we're taking you to the hospital. That's what the child protective system is. If health care was like that, there'd be a hospital on every corner. Yeah. But it's not, because you have checks and balances in place. You can't run roughshod over people, but you can in child protective.
Healthcare is like that, but, I mean, that's another
Well, it's got its problems, too, but there's not complete confidentiality and immunity. You can get sued, and, your records can be looked at, and, you can't get away with what you can get away with in child protective, which is anything.
Mm-hmm.
True. I was wanting to ask you, last year she mysteriously died. Had you heard about that senator from the state of Georgia who was trying to fight that?
Nancy Schaefer.
I missed the beginning of what you said. Correct. Somebody mysteriously died? Who?
Nancy
Schaefer. That's who you're talking about, Mike?
Yes.
Huh. I don't know anything about it. I don't think.
Oh,
last year, she mysteriously
Senator Nancy Schaefer from Georgia, who was just dropping a huge bomb on this industry, and then her and her husband ended up dead. Of course, they called it a murder-suicide.
Oh, my gosh.
She was murdered, silenced. Yeah, I'm going to have to get you some information on Nancy
email
Schaefer
me that
because
stuff.
She was, I think, the only one in Congress that was actually speaking out about it or trying to get something done. I'm going to post some of those links here, but it is that time. We're going to be right back after this short break. Stay tuned. Mary Callahan here on Truth Brigade Radio. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Truth Brigade on AmericanFreedomRadio.com with Mary Callahan tonight, author of Memoirs of a Baby Stealer, lessons she learned as a foster mother, and she's working on a website she mentioned earlier, ilovedyouFirst.org. I guess you're, about 3-4 weeks out on that, Mary?
18 days.
18 days, all right.
I loved you first with a D at the end of love. ilovedyouFirst.org. But there's a page up already with a countdown.
And you know what? I posted that here in the calendar, too, so when people come back to listen to the archive or whatever, it's right here. And then we'll talk about how to get your book again a little bit later. We have another caller on the line, and we didn't really get to say goodbye to Mike, but thank you, Mike, and that was a very good point. I sent you that link, by the way, or a link, Mary, so if you do get a chance to look at your email, you can look at Nancy Schaefer's great work. But our next call tonight looks like a Skype call, so if that is you, welcome to the show.
Happy birthday, Christie. Happy birthday, Mary. How you doing?
Oh, fine.
Hi, Louie. How you doing? Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Free cake for everybody. Everybody gets a pie. Anyways, quick question for Mary. Mary, how much does race factor into baby snatching?
Quite a bit. And there's been a lot of studies on that. And, there's just the statistics are very easy to come by, how many kids in the system are white and how many are not. And, you're far more likely. And there have been a lot of studies where social workers were given scenarios and whether they would remove the kids or not. And if the only thing changed in it is whether the child is black or white, then the black child will be removed and the white child won't be.
Really?
So, yeah, it's huge. Actually, in my free time, I'm writing letters every now and then to people like President Obama about the race issue and how, that certainly is something he should be interested in. But
wow. I heard actually the opposite, that it was easier to sell, white children, so they like the good, healthy, vibrant ones as opposed to the ones that are really being abused because they're harder to... pawn out or get someone to
stay in the system and don't get adopted, then the money just keeps coming. But if kids are very adoptable...
The like black children or whatever will stay in the system then, whereas the white ones get, adoptive parents?
Well, they're certainly taken sooner so that there's more of them in the system. And chances are, and I don't know about this for sure, but I'm thinking that it's probably easier to find an adoptive home for a white child. I know that my April, who I keep referring to, she was removed with her sister and 2 brothers, and she and her sister stayed in the system forever, but the brothers went back to Dad within, the year, and I asked why. If Dad was so dangerous, why would 2 kids go home and 2 not? And they said the boys weren't as adoptable because they were overweight.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, have only white kids, and when you have white kids, fatten them up.
Well,
the reason why I asked is because I'm starting a new type of boutique for non-GMO kids, and I need to know what's more marketable. You know?
All right, Louie. Well, that a great question, and gives us an opportunity to learn more. Do you have any other questions for Mary tonight?
No, but since Mary says that like kids get taken, everyone stay white, everybody.
Okay, Louie. All right. Thanks so much for your call. That is Louie B., our resident comedian of Crotch Shot Radio.
You know, there is money that comes in for every child that's adopted from the foster care system. But the interesting thing is if the adoption fails and they go back into the system, the money doesn't have to be returned. So the same child can be adopted more than once and get the subsidy for the state more than once. And I once asked the people that run the child protective system here, not the guy who's there now because he's much more honest, but the people that were there before, what percentage of adoptions from foster care fail. And they said, oh, we don't keep those records. Yeah, right. Like that would be so hard to come up with that number. But I know plenty of people who've adopted kids and the adoption has failed. So that money, I mean, that child can be readopted, and the whole thing is a racket.
It really is, and just so disheartening. You mentioned earlier, though, that, if you see someone, like, swat their children's butt in the grocery store or something like that, that you're a mandatory reporter, that you're supposed to call 911 and report that right away. And then I was looking at mandatory reporters, and there was this endless list, like all clergy, all healthcare workers, all education workers. The list goes on and on. So that basically means that if you don't call 911 and, maybe say there's one of your supervisors nearby and they're testing you, then something happens to you, you get punished because you didn't call 911 on something that you don't think is abuse?
Well, that's the fear. That's what people will always say to you. If I don't report it and it turns out something's going on, you can you can be charged with a crime. And there are a few cases out there where it's happened. And one of them had to do with a nurse who, in the emergency room, pointed out some bruises to the doctor, but did not call the hotline, thinking that, now he can evaluate the situation and decide whether to call the hotline. The child ended up returned to family and was then, badly injured or killed by family. And when her documentation showed that, she wrote something about, noted these bruises on the back that looked like a hand and pointed it out to the doctor, but she didn't call the hotline, she was charged with a crime, and there was a whole trial and everything because of it. So people do fear.
Well, that makes sense because maybe this was like 5 or 6 years ago or something. My daughter got hit on her bicycle. And, I didn't see any broken bones or bruises or whatever, but I was just scared, a mother panicking, oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
so I take her to the hospital, and I swear to you, 20 minutes later, CPS was there. And, I'm thinking, like, what? She's just riding a bike, gets hit and falls just like every other kid. And, it ended there. So thankfully, still, at the same time, I was really blown away. I didn't know that there were so many mandatory reporters. In fact, there was another one. My daughters, they played softball. And my cute little baby Amberly, oh my goodness, they were playing catch. And, you always keep your eye on the ball, baby, keep your eye on the ball. And Samantha is bigger than Amberly, so she would throw the ball a little bit harder. And anyways, so Amberly always joked she kept her eye on the ball. It hit her in the eye. She had a black eye. And once again, the next day we were visited by CPS. I'm just thinking... What
the interesting thing is,
and again, it didn't go anywhere or whatever, but still, that is really hardcore. And now I'm realizing, wow, it's because we're at schools or in hospitals or at church, and they're just lickety-split, Johnny on the spot.
But, like my friend who got her boys back from the foster care system and put the 4-year-old into Head Start, she got reported to DHS by them almost on a weekly basis. And one of the times it was because of a bruise on his arm Well, the bruise was there because he had to get his lead level drawn to be in Head Start. And you don't think a 4-year-old holds still to have blood drawn. So, yeah, he came back to school with but really, you can see, you look at it, it's in the place where they draw blood. Then one time she pulled up in the parking lot and left her other 2 kids sleeping in the car while she went onto the playground to get Timmy. Mm-hmm. So apparently you're not allowed to leave kids in a parked car. She was out of it for 3
walk
minutes.
Outside and get your other child for a second. Give me a break.
And the thing is, if my granddaughter is in daycare and shows up with a bruise, nothing happens. Nobody's watching the parking lot to see if I got out. It's like if you're under the microscope, you're not going to win because you just can't. You can't always live by the rules. But if you're not under the microscope, you're fine. Nobody's watching. Nobody's paying that much attention. And it's really, if you've gotten yourself under the microscope, low income will do it quickly. But, if you're fighting the system, you're under the microscope,
Yeah, those are those special circumstances where you don't get an investigation. They just show up at your door when you're live on the air and then threaten to put you in prison for 50 years with, I still don't even know what I supposedly did, but...
Oh, my gosh.
Gosh, but some things... It's complete insanity. You mentioned at the federal level they were debating, I guess, different ways to deal with this system. And I recently heard the Supreme Court arguing a case where I guess somebody wanted them to investigate something that had happened in a local, on the local level, and a similar situation, but the child was snatched in school because of a phone call, and they were arguing if that was due process or not, or if they, should be allowed to just take a child and ask them questions, or, it blew my mind because they were really hell-bent on the idea that they should be able to take a child anytime they want, just because somebody says something. And the problem is, that information is so widespread that people, look, if you piss off your neighbor, or if you expose your mayor or Congress or whatever, people will do that. They can call and make these reports about anything. And, if you're one of those on the radar, on the list, then you're going to have exactly what happened to us happened to you. So I just want to, and this is another thing. It's been bothering me quite a bit. When I was in the courthouse, this was last month, there was a father who I guess was going through a situation with the separation, and the mom, didn't really want to cooperate. And he was at the window at the court clerk's asking for help. What should I do? And she says, well, I suggest you hotline her. There wasn't any abuse or anything. He just wanted to see her and his children. And I looked at her, and then I looked at him, and I was pretending not to hear. But when she said that, I had to step in, and I said, I don't ever recommend anyone hotlining anyone because you will never see your children again. Yeah. And I looked at him in the eye, and she gave me a dirty look. But even court clerks, and they're telling people, go hotline. Oh, you don't like them, or oh, that mother won't let you play with, your drug-addicted kids, or whatever reason. Oh, just hotline them. We're concerned. And,
there has
got to end. Millions of families a year being destroyed, and this has just got to stop.
And, I have to say that if you're the person that has to investigate whether this person really did abuse their kids when the spouse on the way out the door is claiming that it's happened, it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You don't know which way to go. Are you sending the kid back with an abuser? Are you letting someone successfully sabotage her ex's life for the rest of his life? How do you decide, But I don't know. I don't think I have the answers to everything out there, but I've known so many people, even some of the parents that I've gotten to know whose kids were in the system, will say things to me like, my sister-in-law didn't even pick up her kid when she fell down and skinned her knee. I'm thinking of calling the hotline. I think, why would you do that to somebody else?
It's complete, and you know what, people, maybe they don't, I mean, some of them do know, people that use it, oh, well, I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat and I don't like your views, so I'm going to, you know, people do it for that, but really neighbors and friends and community members, it's just insanity. You know what? If you have a question about what's going on in your neighbor's home, why don't you knock on your neighbor's door and ask? Yeah. And you know what? Maybe there is a little chaos or whatever, but I bet you can help them a lot more by offering a hand, a shoulder, a heart, a meal maybe. Who knows? Whatever. Yeah. Maybe they don't need anything at all. Maybe it was a complete misunderstanding. But to go and call people that are actively stealing children for money has got to stop. It's that time. We'll be right back. TruthBrigade Radio. Back. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Truth Brigade on AmericanFreedomRadio.com with Mary Callahan tonight, talking about her adventures in foster care land. Mary, can you believe it's almost 2 hours already?
It does fly.
I feel like we just barely scratched the surface, and I hope between your schedule as a nurse and mine, we can have you back to go further in depth and even talk a little bit about your son and how you cured him from autism, because that's a really important topic here as well. But, gosh, we have about 6 minutes left, so I want to make sure that everybody knows how to get your book so you don't get, I mean, if you want to go to Amazon and spend $150, go for it. But
I'll have to look at that.
Send the $150 to Mary for her work exposing this, and
I'll send you 50 books.
There you go. I also wanted to give out the website nccprblog.org. That's nccprblog.org. You do a lot of writing and stuff for them, right, Mary?
Yeah, I've worked a lot. It's the National Coalition for Child Protective Reform, and Richard Wexler, and I got to tell you, he's been my secret weapon over the years, because when you are trying to write op-eds and talk to state legislature and stuff like this, if you lose your credibility by saying something that's not accurate, then it's over, you know. So everything gets run by him to make sure that I'm not exaggerating or something like that. And, he's just really, he's had an awful lot to do with Maine making the changes that it made just by being kind of, when he first came up here after Logan Marr died, everybody was like, outside agitator. But, I'm not from the outside. I'm a Mainer, so people would listen to me. But he was the guy that really knows the system inside and out. And he wrote a book called Wounded Innocence years ago. And he was a reporter who said he covered the child protective beat and suddenly realized these are all poor kids. Where are the middle-class kids? Where are the upper-class kids? They say child abuse crosses socioeconomic lines. Why doesn't foster care? So he started doing more research and realized that the whole thing's a racket. And then it's money-driven. You really have to find a better way to finance a system so that it doesn't grow itself into this lunacy that it's grown to right now, that it doesn't protect kids. It hurts, I think, personally. Yes. I think if you looked at the numbers, it hurts far more kids than it helps.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. And you said the name of his book is called Wounded Innocence?
Yeah, and it's Richard Wexler.
I'm going to have to look that up, too. That sounds great.
And there's been some interesting books written by former foster children. There's one called 3 Little Words by a former foster child in Florida who grew up to be a lawyer. She looked back on her own records and found that she was placed with registered sex offender once and a couple of times with people who had criminal backgrounds. And all the while, she just wanted to be back with family. I mean, she got lucky in terms of finally getting adopted into a family that could put her through college and law school and everything. But still, her story is pretty astounding. And, it's funny,
Does
3 Little Words.
Against CPS?
3 Little Words does not mean I love you, which is what everybody thinks. It's when she was adopted and they asked her if she wanted to be adopted, and she said, I guess so.
Oh, wow.
But,
what else is the kid? The children don't know what to say or what to do. They see their, parents either being hauled off in a car or they're being, taken away. And, I mean...
To the kids. I mean, you keep calling it legalized kidnapping. Yeah, that's what it is to these kids.
I mean, they got to be scared to death, you know, cops or psychologists.
And sometimes cops are coming in with them.
Workers.
Sure.
Yeah. So they kind of get him to say what they want him to say. So her book is called 3 Little Words.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to look that up.
I can't remember her name, but that was a pretty amazing book, too.
Okay, and she's a lawyer in Florida.
Yeah. But, the point that people seem to forget in this whole thing is that bond that exists because you're blood relatives, you just can't replace it just by saying, oh, these people have a nicer house. No, it's not. Love is not about who has the nicest house. It's it's so, it's something you can't duplicate, the way people's parents and children feel about each other. And, the bond is something the system just doesn't understand.
They understand it. I think they're kind of doing it with sinister intentions to start in most cases.
I think some of them get to that point. You hate to think of it that way, and I think a lot of people start with good intentions, and they get swept into the way the system is. And I have met social workers who suddenly one day woke up and said, what the hell have I done? And got out of the system.
Well, if you know any of them, I would love to talk to one. But, Mary, we just have another minute left, and I want to make sure everyone knows where to get your book. Now, do you want them to email me or email you?
Why don't you filter it and get let me know the addresses of people that want copies, and I'll send it. And then anybody who has kids in the system that wants to leave a letter that they might find telling them the truth about what happened, it's www.ilovedyouFirst.org.
Awesome. Okay. www.ilovedyouFirst.org. And to get a copy of her book, just send me an email at truthbrigade@gmail.com, or you could just go to the site, truthbrigade.com, and click on Contact, and just, a few bucks for shipping and handling or whatever, and we'll get the book out to you right away. Mary, it's been such a pleasure. I hope to have you back and talk more about this and what you're doing to help fight this monstrous system here. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. Once again, Mary Callahan, and her new website is ilovedyouFirst.org. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Abundant blessings and love to all. We will see you tomorrow night. Truth Brigade Radio.